Romans chapter 9. A couple weeks ago we got into Romans 9. We got up to verse 13. So today we're going to be picking it up in verse 14. But a few things here. Chapters 9 through 11, they are going to discuss specifically questions regarding the nation of Israel. We've gotten to this point in these chapters. Paul has taken us, through these previous chapters, setting up, hey, there is none who are righteous. We're all sinners, and we all miss the mark. God's standard is perfection, and none of us equate to that at all. We don't even come close. He tells us our good works are mere filthy rags to Him. And so Paul's brought us to that point. He gave us the bad news, but then we get to chapter 8, and he tells us these amazing things about the Lord and His love towards us. As far as nothing can separate us from the love of God. Nothing. Not anything. You can go and do you can go and commit the worst of things, and nothing's going to separate you from His love. And maybe you're here today thinking, well, gee, how can God love me? Of all the things I've done, He does. And He loves you unconditionally. And so, after going through chapter 8, it leads us to the question then, what about the nation of Israel? And as you go through the Old Testament, we see Israel was a nation chosen by God, and that they had a purpose. They had a purpose for Him, and they were chosen by Him. And so does this mean, and a lot of us go, well, does that mean that Israel, God's done with Israel? Well, no, He's not. And as we go through these next 3 chapters here, we're going to see He isn't even close to being done with the nation of Israel. Today in the church, you hear so many things about Israel has been superseded by the church. That's not the case. Okay? We live in what we call the church age. And I believe it's rapidly coming to a close, to where any moment the church could be called home. But He is not done with Israel. And I think we can see in the world events going on around us, what we can see going on in the Middle East, God is quite at work in Israel. And right now He's doing, God has been dealing with the church, but what do you call it? And as we have seen in Romans 8, nothing can separate us from the love of God. And so Paul is going to take these next 3 chapters, and he's going to deal with the issue of Israel and how they fit into all of this. Because, there's certain things that Israel was relying on. Okay? The Jews here, they're relying on their heritage to get them to heaven. Okay? You go through some of the rabbis' teachings today, many believe that none of Israel will perish. That all of them will inherit the kingdom of God. Okay? Based on the mere fact that they were born Jewish. Right? So they feel that being born one of Abraham's children means that they must be going to heaven. Okay? So just because they were born Jewish, that does not mean they are going straight to heaven. And Paul is dealing with that here. As we go on in this chapter. And many of us we've got our heritage. Maybe somebody that what do you call it? Maybe somebody in your family that was wealthy. Maybe somebody in your family was had a political name. Had political ties or something, and you could always go to and say, well, yeah, I've got my uncle here to help me out. Or what do you call it? Or like my kids will come up and say, well, I'm a pastor's kid. You know, something like that. Yeah, like that really helps them much. Probably ends up getting them in more trouble. I always tell my kids, hey, they're watching you. But, you know, we all, you know, each and every one of us has those little different heritages. And so, you know, that's what the Jewish people believed in, was their heritage. You know? And a lot of times your heritage is like, every time if I get pulled over by a cop, they always ask me, well, what do you do? I'm a pastor. like the cop's gonna go, oh. Well, can I even touch your car? You know? I'm always like, yeah, maybe this will get me out of this ticket here. But then I always tell them, well, you know what, just give me the ticket because I deserve it. But, you know, and so, you know, when you have those kinds of things, you'll draw from them when it's an advantage to you. And, you know, so the Jews thought that they could draw from their heritage of being one of Abraham's children. You know, Paul addressed this the last time we studied. You know, just because they're Jewish doesn't mean they are children of promise. You know, we see that Isaac was a child of the Spirit. Okay, he is a descendant of Abraham. But who else is also a descendant of Abraham? Ishmael. Ishmael was a descendant. He's also a child of Abraham, but he was a child of the flesh. God didn't even recognize Ishmael. He's like, no, because he told Abraham, I'm going to give you a son. And when he told Abraham to come and sacrifice his son, he says, bring your only son. And he was talking about Isaac, not Ishmael. You know, Ishmael, we know, was not the chosen child of God. Like I said, he didn't recognize that work of Abraham's flesh. You know, after we see that Isaac is the chosen child, we come to two other children. We come to Esau and we come to Jacob. You know, and we see God working through Jacob, but not through Esau. Because, you know, Esau was concerned more of the things of the flesh. He was concerned of the fleshly things. And you know, as we ended last week, you know, we ended, you know, in verse 13 it says, as it is written, Jacob I have loved, but Esau I have hated. And the thing is, you know, most people dwell on the part that you know, the Esau I have hated. The reality is how could God even write that Jacob was the one that he loved? I mean, Jacob was a little weasel. You know, all the things that Jacob tried to pull, and yet God says, this is the one I love. Because he had the things of the Spirit in mind. And so the Jews, they would come and say, well, I'm of Abraham. You know, and Paul is sitting here going, well, so was Ishmael. Or they would say that, that I'm of Isaac. Well, Paul would say, so was Esau. It isn't a matter of our heritage, but that the only way that you become children of the promise is simply by your faith in Jesus Christ. That's it. That's how you become the seed of Abraham, the offspring of Abraham, is by your faith in Jesus Christ. It's by your faith. John the Baptist confronted the religious leaders. And he called these guys a bunch of snakes. And he probably, John the Baptist was probably not one who read the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. He probably really didn't care about that book too much. Because when he sees these guys, he tells them, you're a brood of vipers. When they come down to the Jordan, they're coming down to see, what's this guy up to? What's he doing down here? And he warned them of the judgment that would come. And he told them, basically, it wasn't because of their heritage that they were connected as descendants of Abraham. This did not sit well with them. John was not out to win popularity contests. John was there to tell the truth. And, just like I'll tell you guys, coming to church doesn't make you a Christian. It's your faith in Jesus Christ that makes you a Christian. He also told them, God could raise up children from stones if he wanted to. And that our heritage had nothing to do with it. It's all about our personal relationship with Christ. Gang, that's what matters. That's it. Nothing else. And so verse 14 it says, what shall we say then? Is there unrighteousness with God? Certainly not. Okay. Remember here that Paul, he's been dealing with God's election previously. Okay. That God chose Abraham. And then God chose the line from Abraham through Isaac, then Jacob. And then we'll see that later that God changed the name of Jacob to Israel, meaning one that is governed by God. And so, that's how we get to the, to that question above, about his election. We left off last time, like I said, in verse 13 it says, as it is written, Jacob I have loved, but Esau I have hated. And this helps us get the flow of what Paul is writing about here. The answer here, though, it's certainly not. And the thing is, this can be a hard issue for us to deal with. Trying to deal with God's choosing of us, that he predestined us, yet we have a choice to accept him. All this, you try to wrap your brain around it, how it all functions. Because it tells us, he predestined us. He knows. See, God's got all this foreknowledge. He knows what every one of us is going to choose. But yet it says he chose us. But he chose us knowing we would choose him. So, and we're going to see in chapter 10 that Paul will say, whoever will choose, let them come. Let them come. And so then we see that we have a responsibility to come back, that comes back on us, that we have to make a choice. We have to make that choice for Christ, to choose him. These two truths, they're a consistent balancing act. And you see that throughout the scriptures. If you take one away, the other is just going to fall down. You can't take either one away. They go hand in hand. So God chooses us, yet he tells us that you need to make a choice. Chosen or not chosen. Those who do not choose. Those who choose. Maybe you're sitting here today going, well, you know what? I'm not going to choose him. Okay? Well, then what you're doing is he hasn't chosen you. Well, wait a minute. I want to choose it. Then he's chosen you. The thing, what I tell you today is make that choice for Christ. This is eternal. This is eternity that's riding on the line.